Well, Nintendo and the Pokemon Company are back at it again with some more disappointments. And as these things keep developing, I am so glad that I stopped making Pokemon content now. Anyway, I just want to touch on a few of these articles that really solidify my reasoning behind switching my content to something different. So, Nintendo has recently updated its rules, basically. A lot of it's understandable. They do have to protect their IP. But if you know anything about Nintendo, they tend to go a little overboard on that. So effectively, they're trying to crack down on emulated games or other circumvention software, whatever that means, for content creators specifically, which makes it quite difficult to, say, play older Nintendo games, specifically older Pokemon games, as the article's pointing out here. But it gets worse from here because of this one right here. Some of this stuff kind of makes sense in a way, but quite literally modifying a 3DS to support a capture card could go under this. And then you have to face the Nintendo lawyers, which seems kind of absurd if you really think about it. And it is possible that even Showdown could go under this sort of umbrella, because some of these terms are a little bit ambiguous, and with Nintendo you tend to want to err on the side of caution, which the Pokemon Company is very close to Nintendo, even if they're technically a different company. So you could see where this could cause some problems for some people, but it gets even more fun, because Pokemon World Championship had some interesting stuff going on that adds fuel to the fire, and a lot more detail is in this YouTube video if you're interested. But essentially, just before the tournament, the rule set literally changed a few weeks before the tournament began. That's a problem for a world championship, because the best players in the game are the ones going here, and these players need to be well kept up with the meta. But when you change the rule set that close to the tournament, you kind of put these pro players in a bit of a scramble to have to build a new team that accounts for all of the new Pokemon that are showing up. In this case, it's the arrival of Pokemon from home, which will include the Legends Arceus exclusives. Some of those just so happen to be pretty good and have to be considered for your competitive team to stay viable, possibly even having one or two of those in your team for it to stay viable, which for a casual, ranked ladder grind or whatever, that's not a big deal. This is the biggest Pokemon tournament we're talking about here. That's an issue. But they changed something else as well. They adjusted their hack checks that, based on the article, are flawed, possibly even broken, because you have this instance here where supposedly 3 of this player's Pokemon were flagged after winning 2 games, so it didn't even catch it for a little while. And supposedly these Pokemon only failed the hack check because they were not added into Pokemon Home. Now, it does also say these were cloned via PK hacks, so that probably is what really did it, but we'll come back to this later. There's another instance here where someone's Basculegion got flagged by the hack check. Apparently it's a clone of someone else's, but this player just withdrew from the tournament after no longer being able to use the Basculegion. You might think, well, that's great. This new thing is keeping people from using cloned or hacked Mon or whatever, except it's not actually doing that, because the world champion of this tournament literally had an Amoonguss that should have been caught by the hack check. But apparently this hack check is really only catching Pokemon from Legends Arceus specifically. So it's literally only catching Pokemon that are from a different game. That's definitely not a paywall at all. Absolutely not. And the players that were complaining about this, they know that ginning is standard practice. Pros do this all the time. And you might wonder, well, why would they do that? Shouldn't they have all the time in the world to make a team properly? Well, as it's pointed out here, you need access to 5 games with the tools required to access all of those at once in order to stay current with the meta and maintain a competitively viable team. Again, we are not talking about casual ranked grinds here. We are talking about the best players in the world having to jump through these kinds of hoops and paywalls to build viable teams. And doing that can take up to dozens of hours to build these things, which for a pro player, that is dozens of hours that you're not practicing. That matters, which may not matter for a casual player, but for a pro player, that's a lot of time that you have to give up in order to build a team, which literally means that somebody that's genning will have a competitive advantage to somebody that's not genning because they'll have a lot more time to practice with that team. And as it's also stated here, this effectively gatekeeps people that don't have the resources available to get Pokemon legitimately from, say, friends or whatever. So if you have a really large friend group, you can negate a lot of this because you have a lot more resources to build your team with. Whereas people that don't have these big friend groups are not going to be able to build out the teams that they want to, which may not be an issue for most people, but for pros, this kind of matters because you're literally just giving competitive advantages to people with considerable friend groups and that have a lot of extra time on their hands for effectively arbitrary reasons. And it's not like these people make enough money off of these tournaments that this can be a full-time job. They really don't make that much. So most likely these people have an alternate source of income, and that means they have a limited amount of time to actually put together teams. It feels like arbitrary limits at this point. And I have tried to give the Pokemon Company and Nintendo the benefit of the doubt for a while, because maybe the culture over there is so vastly different than how people in the West think that maybe perhaps there's a disconnect there. But it feels like it's getting worse. That doesn't make any sense. All that being said, I'm glad I'm not making Pokemon content anymore because it'll eventually get to where it's not even worth doing with the amount of restrictions that will eventually come, which I get it. To a lot of people, this may not seem like a bad thing or even a big deal. But the fact is, it's getting worse over time. When big companies do things like this and get away with it, they tend to go further. And this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. And it's going to get to where Nintendo and Pokemon games are going to be exclusively for very casual audiences that have no interest in, competitive play or content creation whatsoever. Which, if Nintendo and the Pokemon Company wish to dig their own grave like that, that is up to them. But this progression is not a good one to stay on. And I'll probably keep up with these issues as they keep developing, because I am curious. But anyway, my rant's over. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all next time.